Welcome everyone. In this video, we will discuss the motivation in the detail. So, the introduction. In ancient times, the motivation has been recognized as an important determiner of behavior. So, motivation is an explanatory concept used to answer questions about why organisms behave as opposed to how they accomplish the behavior. So it is a used to account for observed variability in the behavior both within individual and among individual. In general terms, the motivation is a set of one or more conditions which activate, turn on behavior, direct the behaviors towards the same goal, and maintain behaviors until the goal is achieved. So, motivation word is taken from a Latin word movere, meaning to move. Motivation is what translates learning into the observable behavior. An internal condition initiated by drives, needs, or desires and producing goals directed behavior. So, motive, a specific internal condition directing an organism behavior toward a goal. Need, a physiological condition arising from an imbalance and usually accompanied by arousal. Drive, an internal aroused condition that initiates behavior to satisfy the physiological needs. So definition, so we can define definition. We can define like that. Refers to states within a person or animal that drive behavior towards some goal, according to the Morgan and King 1975. And according to the Rouge 1958, the motivation is a persistent behavior which appears to be dominated by time being by a relatively limited group of the stimuli acting on the organism. And according to the P.T. Young, it is a process of the action, is a process of an action sustaining the activity in progress and regulating the pattern of the activity. Now the stages of the motivation. The motivation has three aspects: driving stage, a state that drives behavior. It is set in the motion by bodily needs and the mental event. Arousal of the behavior by the physiological state, the goal toward which the behavior is directed. So motives thus arises behavior and directed toward an appropriate goal. So we can say the motivation cycle like that. The first is the driving state, then behavior, then goal, then relief. Now drive. The first stage is driving stage, or drive means an internal aroused condition initiates behavior to satisfy the physiological needs. Next, goal or inantum. A goal refers to some substance, objects, or environmental conditions capable of reducing or temporarily eliminating the complex of internal condition which initiated action. Now, process of the motivation. Drive, the mobilization of the behavior; incentive, the drive reduction. Homeostasis. The body tends to maintain a balance called homeostasis in many of its internal physiological processes. A homeostatic mechanism is like a thermostat. The body always makes an attempt to keep the condition of the blood in a perfect proportion. Under all conditions of the body, tries to keep the proportion of the water, salt, oxygen, CO2, acidity, sugar, proteins, etc. in the proper balance. So homeostasis refers to the balance or equilibrium. Different homeostatic system probably regulate the other biological motives. Now the classification of the drives. There are three major classification of the human motives: physiological motive, social motive, personal motives. Physiological motives. The first one is a hunger. The hunger is a function of the certain physiological mechanism resulting to the survival. It is a function of the taste, smell, appearance according to the canon and the Washburn 1912. Hunger directly result to the stomach contraction. Friedman and the Staggs have proposed that the stimulus for the hunger is supplied to the brain. The lateral hypothalamus starts eating. If it is excessive, then it is called hyperphagia. That is a Latin word. Ventromedial area stops eating. If it is against or opposed to eating, then it is called aphasia. That is also a Latin word. The multiple internal stimulus for the hunger: blood sugar level and short-term control, fat level and long-term control, hormones and eating behavior. The stomach as a stimulus, hypothalamic controls. Now the thirst. The conservation of the water and maintain the concentration of the bodily fluids are regulated by the elaborate physiological mechanism in which hormones plays a vital role. This is ADH. It appears that two types of the stimulus trigger thinking behavior. Now the cellular dehydration. It stimulates the pituitary gland to release a particular hormone which tells the kidneys to reabsorb water into the bloodstream. Then next is the reduced blood volume. The lowered water level reduces the volume of the blood. This reduced blood volume apparently causes the kidneys to secrete certain chemicals which circulate to the hypothalamus and stimulate it to begin drinking behavior, according to Epstein, Fitzmans and the Simons 1969. And according to the Coffer 1972, a person can feel thirsty even when the mouth is completely anesthetized. The dry mouth appears to be only a secondary determinant of the drinking behavior. The next is the sex. The sex is a very powerful drive which influences the actions of the individual to a very great extent. The sex behavior depends upon a combination of the internal factor and external, one learned and unlearned environmental stimuli. On the biological drives are fatigue, fear and anger, pain, pleasure, aggressiveness, maternal behavior and obesity. Now next one is the social motives. Secondary motives under social motives are mastery motives, precise and the blame, sympathy, self-submission. Next one is the personal motives. Under personal drives, need for achievement, need for curiosity, need for approval, need for affiliation, need for aggression, need for recognition in the status, need for the power. Now the measurement of the motivation. There are three important types of the measuring the motivations are activity method. The activity of the O is observed by introducing a drive activity method is divided into the field observation method and laboratory observation method. Field observation method. Free activity of animal is studied under a motivating condition without any experimental control, that is called seasonal breeding. The next is the laboratory observation method. The spontaneous activity of the animal is studied under laboratory condition, that is the nest building, eating. The next one is the counterbalancing of the motive method. Two incompatible drives are brought forth into the direct opposition to compare their relative strength. Counterbalancing of the motive method is of three types: method of choice, method of preference, and obstruction method. Method of choice. The relative strength of the different drives are measured by comparing one against the other and observing which one dominates. Now the method of the preference. It makes one to choose between two or more incentives that arouse the one and some drive. Two incentives are given at a time. Now, the abstraction method. It is putting an abstraction and the persistence of the particular drive is measured. Thus, if the drive is sufficiently strong, the organism will cross the abstraction. Now, the contrast of the motives. One motive is contrasted with another at a time, that is, example, anger, hunger, thirst. The role of motivation in the learning. Motivation and learning closely related to one another. The social learning theory also stresses the importance of the learning. Many patterns of the behaviors are learned by watching the behavior of others and observing its consequences for them. In all learning experiments, it is observed that when organism is hungry or needs to explore out of curiosity or desire the escape from the confinement, it learns quickly and efficiently. Theories of the motivation. Many theories have been advanced to explain human motivation. Physiological theory of motivation, self-actualization, achievement motivation theory, intrinsic motivation theory, psychoanalytic theory, social learning theory of the motivation. So, physiological theory of motivation. Morgan offers a physiological theory of the motivation. He pointed out that internal physiological condition which arouse motives and control the motivated behavior. Next is the self-actualization theory, 1954. It needs that are low in the hierarchy must be at least partially satisfied before those that are higher can become important source of motivation. So Maslow in the 1970 proposed that motives to which he referred as needs could be arranged in a hierarchy or pyramid. Achievement motivation theory. The need for achievement first defined largely on the basis of the clinical studies done by the Murray 1939. A group of the psychologists under the leadership of the MacLean made intensive study on man in motivation to achieve. Intrinsic motivation theory. It was propounded by Harry Harlow 1950. It holds that intrinsic drives are significant on the field of motivational behavior. The intrinsic motives like explanatory and the manipulative behavior and curiosity are more significantly manifested in the human behaviors. Psychoanalytic theory. Sigmund Freud stressed the unconscious motivation and the role of life and that instinct in the way of human behavior. The concept of the unconscious motivation is one of the